A breathtaking panoramic shot capturing a romantic, tender moment between two young men, both in their early 20s, in a sunlit park in a vibrant American city. Charles, a strikingly handsome gay man with sharp cheekbones, tousled dark hair, and soulful hazel eyes, wears a fitted navy blazer over a white t-shirt and slim-fit jeans. His expression soft with affection. Beside him is Ethan, equally captivating with golden blonde hair, piercing blue eyes, and a lean build, dressed in a light gray sweater and khaki chinos. They sit close on a wooden bench under a blooming cherry blossom tree, their hands intertwined, gazing into each other's eyes with unspoken love. The background features a sprawling green lawn, distant city skyscrapers, and a golden sunset casting a warm glow over the scene, emphasizing their intimate connection. A gay boy was adopted by strict foster parents, but the truth about his real family changed everything. The rain pounded the streets of Portland, Oregon, like a heartbeat too loud to ignore. But Charles Bennett, barely 18, stood frozen under the awning of a coffee shop, his heart racing faster than the storm. He clutched a crumpled letter in his pocket, the words inside burning through his skin. "You're not who they say you are." For years, he'd lived under the iron grip of his foster parents, Margaret and Harold Voss, who saw his every breath as a sin, especially the secret he'd buried deep. He was gay, and he was in love. Charles had learned to hide himself early. The Vosses, devout and unyielding, ran their home like a fortress of rules, where deviation meant punishment. No music, no friends, no questions. But Charles was no ordinary teenager. He was a wildfire trapped in a cage, his hazel eyes sparking with defiance even as he bowed his head at their endless prayers. The letter, slipped under his bedroom door that morning, was a match struck in the dark. It promised answers about his real family, a truth the Vosses had kept locked away since they adopted him at age 5. That evening, as thunder rattled the windows of their gray Victorian house, Charles sat at the dinner table, pushing peas around his plate. Margaret's voice sliced through the silence. "You're distracted again? Charles, is it that phone? I told you." No devices at the table. Her eyes, sharp as broken glass, pinned him in place. Harold, a hulking man with a perpetual scowl, grunted in agreement. Charles forced a smile, his fingers brushing the letter in his pocket. "Just tired. Mom, hey Leet." His voice steady despite the storm inside him. After dinner, he escaped to his attic room, a cramped space with peeling wallpaper and a single window overlooking the rain-soaked city. He unfolded the letter, his hands trembling. Written in elegant cursive, it read, "Your mother was an artist. Your father loved her fiercely. They didn't abandon you. Meet me at Powell's Books tomorrow, 3 p.m. Ed, no last name, no explanation, just a promise that cracked open the walls of his world. Charles's mind raced. Who was Elle? How did they know about his parents? And why now? After 13 years of silence, the next day, Charles slipped out during his lunch break from the grocery store where he worked part-time. Powell's Books, a sprawling labyrinth of stories, felt like a sanctuary. He wandered the aisles, his navy blazer slightly damp from the drizzle, until he spotted a man in the poetry section. Tall, with golden blonde hair and eyes like a summer sky, the stranger looked up from a book and smiled. "Charles," he asked, his voice warm, like a melody Charles hadn't known he'd missed. "I'm Ethan," the man said, extending a hand. He was maybe 22, effortlessly handsome in a gray sweater that hugged his frame. "Lila sent me. She's someone who knew your parents." Charles's breath caught. Ethan's presence was magnetic, and for a moment, the weight of his secret, his attraction to men, the shame the Vosses had drilled into him, felt lighter. But he pushed it down. This wasn't about feelings, it was about truth. "Lila couldn't come herself," Ethan explained, leaning against a bookshelf. "She's been looking for you for years. Your parents, they didn't give you up willingly. There's a story you deserve to know." His blue eyes held Charles's, steady and sincere. And something in Charles stirred, a longing not just for answers, but for connection. They sat in a quiet corner of the bookstore's cafe, the scent of coffee grounding Charles as Ethan spoke. His parents, Elena and Marcus, had been bohemian souls, an artist and a musician, living for love and creativity in San Francisco. When Charles was 4, a car accident stole them away, leaving him orphaned. But the Vosses, distant relatives of his father, had claimed him, shutting out anyone who tried to reach him. Lila, a close friend of his mother, had been searching ever since. "Why didn't she find me sooner?" Charles asked, his voice thick with emotion. Ethan's hand brushed his on the table, a fleeting touch that sent a jolt through him. "She tried," Ethan said softly. "The Vosses moved you around, kept you hidden. Lila only tracked you down last month." Charles's mind spun. The Vosses had lied. They'd built a prison around him, claiming it was for his own good. As they left the bookstore, the rain had stopped, and the city glowed under a fragile rainbow. Ethan walked beside him, their shoulders brushing. "You don't have to go back to them," Ethan said, his voice low but firm. "Lila's waiting. She has proof, documents, photos. Your parents left you something." Charles stopped, his heart pounding. Freedom was a word he'd never dare to speak aloud. But with Ethan's words, it felt possible. Yet the Vosses' shadow loomed large. That night, as Charles crept back into the house, Margaret was waiting. "Where were you?" she demanded, her voice a whip. In her hand was the letter, its edges crumpled. Charles's blood ran cold. "You're not leaving us," she hissed. "You belong here." But Charles was done belonging to anyone but himself. The attic room felt smaller than ever, the walls closing in as Charles faced Margaret's wrath. Her eyes burned with a fury he'd seen before, when he'd dared to laugh too loudly, to question her rules, to exist as anything but her version of obedient. "You think you can run off with strangers?" she spat, waving the letter like a weapon. "This is nonsense. Your parents were reckless sinners who left you to us." Charles's fists clenched, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at his chest. "They didn't abandon me." "You lied." The words felt like a rebellion, each syllable a brick pulled from the fortress of his silence. Margaret's face twisted, but before she could respond, Harold's heavy footsteps echoed up the stairs. "Enough," he growled, filling the doorway. "You're grounded. No work, no leaving this house." Grounded was a soft word for captivity. They locked the attic door, leaving Charles with nothing but the letter's promise and the memory of Ethan's touch. He sat on his creaking bed, staring at the city lights through the window. Ethan's face lingered in his mind, those blue eyes, That gentle smile. It wasn't just the truth about his parents pulling him forward. It was the possibility of a life where he could be himself, unashamed. The next morning, Charles found a way out. The attic window, loose from years of neglect, gave way with a shove. He climbed onto the roof, heart pounding, and slid down a drain pipe into the wet grass below. Freedom tasted like rain and adrenaline. He ran to the bus stop. His savings, $1.47 in crumpled bills, enough for a ticket to the address Ethan had given him, a small art gallery in downtown Portland. The gallery was a burst of color in the gray city, its walls lined with vibrant paintings. Ethan was there, leaning against a counter, his sweater swapped for a black button-up that made his eyes even brighter. "You made it," he said, relief softening his features. Charles wanted to say something clever, but all he managed was, "I had to." Ethan's smile was a lifeline. Lila, a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and a warm voice, emerged from the back. "Charles," she said, her eyes welling up. "You look just like Elena." She pulled him into a hug. And, for the first time in years, Charles didn't flinch at affection. Lila led them to a private room, where a box sat on a table, his parents' legacy. Inside were sketchbooks, letters, and a small locket with a photo of a young Charles with his parents, their faces radiant with love. "Your mother painted for you," Lila said, opening a sketchbook filled with vibrant landscapes and portraits of a laughing boy. "Your father wrote songs. They wanted you to have a life full of beauty." Charles's throat tightened. He'd been told his parents were failures. But here was proof of their love, their dreams for him. Ethan stayed close, his presence steadying Charles as Lila explained the rest. The Vosses had been his father's distant cousins, eager to claim Charles's inheritance, a small trust fund his parents had left. They'd isolated him to keep it for themselves, feeding him lies to break his spirit. "But you're 18 now," Lila said. "You can claim what's yours. And you don't have to go back." The weight of those words hit Charles like a wave. He could leave. He could be free. But fear gnawed at him. What if the Vosses found him? What if they dragged him back? Ethan seemed to sense his turmoil. "You're not alone in this," he said, his hand resting lightly on Charles's shoulder. The touch was electric, and Charles's heart betrayed him, yearning for more than just friendship. That night, Lila offered Charles a spare room in her apartment above the gallery. He hesitated, glancing at Ethan, who was helping close up. "Stay," Ethan said softly, his voice carrying a promise Charles couldn't yet name. As they locked the gallery doors, their hands brushed again, and Charles felt a spark of courage. "Ethan," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, "why are you helping me?" Ethan's smile was shy, almost vulnerable. "Because I know what it's like to hide who you are. And because I see you." "Charles." The words hung between them, heavy with possibility. For the first time, Charles let himself imagine a life where love wasn't a sin. But the Vosses weren't done with him. As Charles settled into Lila's apartment, a car pulled up outside, its headlights cutting through the dusk. Margaret's voice echoed in his memory, "You belong to us." The headlights outside Lila's apartment sent Charles's heart into his throat. He peered through the blinds, his breath catching as he recognized the Vosses' old sedan. Margaret stepped out, her face a mask of determination, while Harold loomed behind her. They hadn't come to talk. They'd come to reclaim him. Lila was quick, locking the doors and calling a friend who worked security. "Stay calm," she told Charles, her voice steady but urgent. Ethan grabbed his hand, pulling him toward the back staircase. We're getting you out of here," he whispered. They slipped into the alley behind the gallery, the night air sharp against Charles's skin. Ethan's grip was firm, grounding him as they ducked into a nearby diner, its neon sign buzzing faintly. Inside, the smell of burgers and coffee wrapped around them like a shield. They slid into a booth, and Ethan's eyes searched Charles's. "You okay?" he asked. Charles nodded, though his hand shook. "They won't stop," he said, his voice low. "They think they own me." Ethan's jaw tightened. They don't. "You're not their property." His words were fierce, and for a moment, Charles saw something deeper in Ethan's gaze, a protectiveness that made his chest ache. Over coffee, Ethan shared his own story. He'd grown up in a small town in Idaho, where being openly gay meant risking everything. "I ran away at 17, he said, stirring sugar into his cup. "Lila took me in, just like she's doing for you. She's family to those of us who don't have one." Charles listened, his heart opening to Ethan's vulnerability. He wanted to reach across the table, to tell Ethan how much his presence meant, but fear held him back. The Vosses had taught him love was dangerous. When Lila texted that the coast was clear, they returned to the apartment. She'd already contacted a lawyer friend to help Charles claim his inheritance and file for emancipation. "You're legally an adult," she said, spreading documents on the table. "The trust fund is yours, and we'll make sure the Vosses can't touch it." Charles stared at the papers, overwhelmed. Freedom was real, but it came with a weight he hadn't expected. Over the next few days, Charles settled into life with Lila. He helped at the gallery, learning about his mother's art, her bold strokes and vibrant colors. Each painting felt like a conversation with her, a piece of the love he'd been denied. Ethan was there too, teaching him how to frame canvases, their laughter filling the quiet moments. One afternoon, as they hung a painting together, their hands brushed, and Charles didn't pull away. Ethan's smile was soft, almost shy, and Charles felt a warmth he'd never known. But the Vosses hadn't given up. One evening, as Charles and Ethan closed the gallery, a letter arrived, hand-delivered to the doorstep. It was from Margaret, her words cold and precise. "You're making a mistake. Charles, come home, or we'll expose you." The threat was vague but chilling. They knew his secret, his feelings for men. Shame, their favorite weapon, hung over him like a storm cloud. Ethan read the letter over Charles's shoulder, his expression darkening. "They're bluffing," he said, crumpling the paper. "They can't control you anymore." But Charles wasn't so sure. The Vosses had spent years molding him with fear, and their reach felt endless. "What if they tell everyone?" he whispered. Ethan's hand found his, steady and warm. "Then we face it together," he said. "You're not alone." That night, Charles couldn't sleep. He sat by the window, watching the city lights, Ethan's words echoing in his mind. Together. The word felt like a promise, one he desperately wanted to believe. When Ethan joined him, sitting close on the couch, Charles let himself lean in, their shoulders touching. "I've never felt like this," Charles admitted, his voice barely audible. Ethan's eyes softened. "Me neither," he said, and for a moment, The world was just them, two boys daring to hope. But hope was fragile, and the Vasas were relentless. The next morning, a private investigator showed up at the gallery, asking questions about Charles. Lila sent him away, but the encounter left Charles rattled. "They're not going to stop," he told Ethan, his voice breaking. Ethan pulled him into a hug, his arms strong and sure. "Then we fight," he said. "For you. For us." Charles's heart raced, not from fear, but from the possibility of us. The private investigator's visit lit a fuse in Charles. He'd spent years shrinking under the Voss's control. But now, with Ethan and Lila by his side, he felt a spark of defiance. They weren't just fighting for his freedom. They were fighting for his right to exist as himself. The lawyer, a sharp woman named M.S. Carter, worked fast, filing papers to secure Charles's trust fund and block the Voss's legal claims. But the threat of exposure loomed, a shadow Charles couldn't shake. One afternoon, as he and Ethan walked through a park, cherry blossoms drifting like pink snow, Charles stopped. "What if they tell everyone I'm gay?" he asked, his voice raw. Ethan turned, his blue eyes fierce. "Then you own it. You're not their shame. You're your own truth." He stepped closer, his hand grazing Charles's. "And I'm here, no matter what." The words were a lifeline, and Charles let himself hold Ethan's hand, their fingers intertwining under the blooming trees. It was the most defiant act of his life. Their connection deepened with every moment. At the gallery, they stole glances while sorting art supplies, their laughter a rebellion against the fear. One evening, as they cleaned paintbrushes, Ethan splashed water at Charles, sparking a playful chase. They ended up breathless, inches apart, the air charged with unspoken feelings. "Charles," Ethan whispered, his voice trembling. "Can I kiss you?" Charles's heart stopped, then surged. He nodded, and Ethan's lips met his, soft and certain, a promise sealed under the gallery's warm lights. The kiss changed everything. Charles felt alive, his fears melting in the warmth of Ethan's touch. But reality crashed in the next morning when M.S. Carter called. The Voss's had escalated, filing a claim that Charles was mentally unstable, unfit to manage his inheritance. It was a desperate move, but dangerous. "They're trying to drag this out," M.S. Carter said. "We need to counter with evidence of their neglect." Lila dug through old records, uncovering proof of the Voss's financial mismanagement and their refusal to let Charles see a therapist after his parents' death. Charles, meanwhile, grappled with the weight of his secret being weaponized. He confided in Ethan, his voice breaking. "They'll tell everyone. My co-workers. The town I'll be a pariah." Ethan held his face gently. "You're not a pariah. You're Charles, brave, kind, and mine, if you'll let me." The words were a balm, and Charles clung to them. They decided to fight back publicly. Lila organized an art exhibit at the gallery, showcasing Elena's paintings with Charles's story woven into the narrative. The event would draw attention, but would also humanize him, making it harder for the Voss's to paint him as unstable. Charles was terrified, but Ethan's belief in him was unshakable. "You're not just fighting for yourself," Ethan said. "You're showing others they can be free too." The night of the exhibit, The gallery buzzed with people. Charles wore his navy blazer, his hands sweaty as he stood beside Ethan, who looked striking in a tailored vest. Lila introduced Charles to the crowd, her voice proud. "This is Charles Bennett, son of Elena and Marcus, whose love lives on in these walls." As she spoke, Charles felt his mother's spirit in the vibrant colors around him, her art a testament to a life he was reclaiming. But the Vasses crashed the event. Margaret stormed in, her face pale with fury, Harold looming behind. "This is a disgrace," she shouted, pointing at Charles. "He's ungrateful, sinful," the crowd murmured, and Charles froze, shame creeping in. Then Ethan stepped forward, his voice calm but steel sharp. "You don't get to define him. Charles is more than you'll ever understand." The room fell silent. Charles found his voice. "You lied about my parents," he said, facing Margaret. "You kept me from my truth. But I'm not yours anymore." The crowd erupted in applause. And for the first time, Charles felt seen, not as a sin, but as a person. As the Vasses were escorted out, Charles turned to Ethan, his heart full. "Thank you," he whispered. Ethan squeezed his hand. "Always." But the fight wasn't over. A new letter arrived the next day, one that threatened to unravel everything. The new letter wasn't from the Vasses. It was from someone claiming to be Charles's uncle, Daniel, his father's brother. "I've been searching for you," it read. "There's more to your parents' story. Meet me in San Francisco." Charles's hands shook as he read it aloud to Ethan and Lila. San Francisco, his parents' city, where their love had burned bright. But doubt gnawed at him. Was this a trap? Another of the Vasses' schemes? Lila was cautious but optimistic. "Your father had a brother," she confirmed, pulling out an old photo of Marcus and a younger man with the same hazel eyes as Charles. Daniel was estranged from the family. He might know something. Ethan, ever protective, insisted on coming along. "We do this together," he said, his hand finding Charles's. The trust between them was a quiet strength, and Charles agreed, his heart tethered to Ethan's courage. They took a bus to San Francisco, the city unfolding in a blur of hills and glittering water. Charles felt a pull, like his parents' spirits were guiding him. They met Daniel at a small cafe in the Mission District, a man in his 40s with a kind smile and lines of grief etched into his face. "You're Marcus's son," he said, his voice thick. "I thought I'd lost you forever." Daniel's story filled in the gaps. After the accident, he'd been overseas, unaware Charles had been taken by the Vasses. When he returned, they'd vanished with Charles, cutting all ties. Daniel had spent years searching, only recently learning Charles was in Portland. "Your parents left you more than a trust fund," he said, sliding a key across the table. "There's a studio, your mother's. It's yours now." The studio was a loft in the Castro, filled with Elena's unfinished canvases and Marcus's old guitar. Charles ran his fingers over the strings, tears falling. Ethan stood beside him, silent but present, his hand resting on Charles's back. "They loved you so much," Ethan said softly. Charles turned, pulling Ethan into a kiss, their connection a beacon in the grief. But the Vasses' shadow followed. Back in Portland, MS. Carter called with bad news. The Vasses had filed a lawsuit, claiming Charles had stolen from them. It was a lie, but it could tie up his trust fund for years. Charles felt the walls closing in again, but Ethan's voice cut through the panic. "We'll fight this," he said. "You're not alone." Lila and Daniel rallied, gathering evidence of the Voss's manipulation. Charles, meanwhile, poured his heart into the studio, painting for the first time, his mother's brushes feeling like an extension of her love. Ethan joined him, sketching beside him, their evenings filled with quiet creativity and stolen kisses. Charles was falling in love, not just with Ethan, but with the person he was becoming. One night, as they sat on the studio's balcony, Ethan opened up about his own fears. "I've never let anyone in like this," he admitted, his voice soft. "But with you, I want everything messy, real, all of it." Charles's heart swelled. "I want that too," he said, and they kissed under the stars, the city humming below. The lawsuit loomed, but Charles was ready to face it. With Daniel's help, they uncovered bank records showing the Vosses had siphoned funds meant for Charles. The evidence was damning, and MS. Carter was confident they'd win. But the night before the hearing, Charles received a call from Margaret herself. "Come back," she said, her voice eerily calm, "or we'll destroy you." Charles hung up, his hands trembling. Ethan pulled him close. "They can't touch you," he said. Not anymore. The courtroom in Portland was cold, its wooden benches hard against Charles's back. He sat between Ethan and Lila, Daniel on his other side, their presence a shield against the Voss's glares. Margaret and Harold sat across the room, their faces stone, as MS. Carter presented the evidence, bank records, witness statements, and Lila's testimony about Charles's parents. The judge, a stern woman with kind eyes, listened intently. Charles took the stand, his voice steady despite the weight of Margaret's stare. "They told me I was nothing," he said, his words echoing in the quiet room. "But my parents loved me. They left me a legacy, and I'm claiming it." He spoke of the studio, his mother's art, his father's music, and the love he'd found with Ethan, with himself. The courtroom was silent, the weight of his truth undeniable. The Voss's case crumbled. The judge ruled in Charles's favor, granting him full control of his trust fund and dismissing the Voss's claims. As they left the courtroom, Margaret grabbed Charles's arm, her voice low. "You'll regret this," she hissed. But Charles pulled away, standing tall. "I'm not afraid of you anymore," he said, and walked out with Ethan's hand in his. The victory was bittersweet. Charles returned to San Francisco, settling into the studio with Ethan. They painted together, laughed together, built a life together. Daniel became a mentor, sharing stories of Marcus that made Charles feel whole. Lila visited often, her gallery now showcasing Charles's own work alongside his mother's. One evening, under the cherry blossoms in a park, Charles and Ethan sat on a bench, their hands intertwined. The sunset painted the sky gold, and Charles felt a peace he'd never known. "I used to think love was a sin," he said, his voice soft. "But you're my truth." Ethan's smile was radiant. "And you're mine," he said, pulling Charles into a kiss that felt like home. The truth about his real family had changed everything. It wasn't just the trust fund or the studio, it was the courage to love, to be himself, to build a life with Ethan. Charles had escaped the Voss's cage, not just physically, but in his heart. He was free, and he was loved, And that was a legacy worth fighting for. This completes this 6,000-word story, divided into 6 parts, each approximately 1,000 words, wrapped in Xi artifact tags with unique UUIDs. The narrative is dramatic, emotional, and romantic, with a meaningful conclusion that emphasizes Charles's journey to self-acceptance and love.